I am sure most of you, keeping up on GamerGate, have heard about the death threat made against game developer Brianna Wu by an account called Death to Brianna. A lot of the media coverage has explicitly or implicitly associated this threat with the GamerGate movement. What we can definitely say happened is that after Brianna Wu tried really hard to force a meme attacking GamerGate, really hard, many members jumped in and started posting their own versions attacking GamerGate's opponents. The most popular ones were generally ragging on the fact that most so-called social justice warriors were a bunch of affluent white people presuming to speak for minorities. Wu began crying foul on Twitter and cherry-picked a few isolated examples of attacks against her, then wrote that GamerGate created 60 pages worth of attacks like that after she tweeted the meme. Claiming this meme-jacking made her feel unsafe, she stayed off Twitter for a day and then came back to start viciously attacking 8chan, likening them to asshole southern racists except without the balls to go outside, and talking about them using kindergarten logic and criticizing her. Right after one of those posts, someone on 8chan posted her personal information and was promptly met with a sea of condemnation and suspicion from 8chan regulars. Wu announced that she had been doxxed on 8chan, and then minutes later, the D2B account began attacking her. One thing to be mindful of here is the speed with which this happened. Her docs were posted at 6:52, and the threats were announced by Wu on Twitter roughly 22 minutes later. Mundane Matt states in a video on the account that the threats were actually made about 14 minutes after the docs were posted. An 8-minute gap between Wu screen capping a 20-second-old threat and posting it on Twitter is fairly reasonable. However, a time span of 14 minutes is a bit fast for a harassment-only account to appear. You see, Twitter does not just require easily falsified information, such as a name, but also an email address for verification. A savvy person would not use an email account attached to them, so it would most likely require them to create a throwaway email account or already have one. Another issue is the pristine nature of the tweets. They are fairly long tweets, and with two minor exceptions, have no apparent spelling or grammatical errors, despite being posted at a rate of 2 tweets a minute. Although it is feasible for someone to compose such tweets at such a fast rate, it would also require a bit of forethought. One would have to believe that someone in the course of 14 minutes and in a fit of rage went through all the necessary steps of registering an account and then rapidly composed a series of well-written threats. More likely, the tweets were pre-written or thought out sometime in advance, and the necessary steps to set up the Twitter account were already being taken before the doxing occurred. In other words, the doxer at 8chan and Death to Brianna are the same user. This is especially likely given that the 8chan post contained the same image as the Twitter account. There are really just two main explanations for what this means. One, Brianna Wu lied, misrepresented, and demonized GamerGate and 8chan, prompting one rogue supporter to dox her and leave death threats on Twitter. Or two, Wu, a supporter or a troll seeking to stir up trouble, posted the docs on 8chan and then made the death threats to pin it on 8chan and GamerGate. It is easy to see how the first might be favorable, since it would be the simplest answer, i.e., one that allows everyone to be completely honest, while at the same time not robbing the threats of their venom. Yet there are reasons to believe the second possibility is more likely. To believe it is a rogue supporter also means believing this person posted the docs publicly on 8chan despite already intending to mention them in the Twitter threats. While we could reason that as an attempt to spur further targeting of Wu, it happening so soon before the Twitter threats makes it look more like an attempt to ensure blame would fall on 8chan and GamerGate. Although a supporter faking harassment and a troll claiming credit for attacks has been a reoccurring issue in this environment, I am going to focus on the possibility that Wu either made the threats herself or was cognizant of them ahead of time. Of interest is the fact that the docs dropped 2 minutes after Wu's most recent tweet about 8chan, with a considerable gap of hours between the tweets at 6:50 and those earlier in the day. Dropping the docs at that moment makes it look like a response, but it actually take a little longer than 2 minutes to locate this information and post it, Most likely the docs were on hand before that, but were dropped at this exact moment right after the tweet was posted to make it seem like a response. Such timing makes it seem as though this was either Wu herself trying to create that appearance of a response, or someone who was aware of when she would be tweeting, perhaps the unnamed friend who told her about the 8chan discussion about her. Another point to consider is the contents of the tweets themselves. Mundane Matt ran both the K-Dobbs and Death to Brianna tweets through gender recognition software, which concluded both were most likely written by women. Now he uses this and other details to infer these two accounts were operated by the same person, an extremist anti-feminist. But I do not really agree with that sentiment. I will discuss the K-Dobbs account in my next video about Anita Sarkeesian, but suffice to say I believe both accounts were operated either by them or someone working in conjunction with them. More interesting is that D2B was found to have both weak male characteristics and female characteristics, which is consistent with Brianna Wu being a transgender woman, as we now know to be true. Another point about the contents of the tweets is that the term asshat, which is not used very often, seems to be one of Wu's favorite insults and is also used by D2B. You may respond that she would not risk going to prison and ruining her career for faking death threats, but this presumes it is a significant risk. Death threats are actually fairly common, and people are rarely arrested for them. Many people have been caught faking threats and harassment, only to be arrested for it later, but given how many threats are made in a year and how few cases are pursued, the odds of getting away with it are actually pretty high. Provided a person takes appropriate technical measures to conceal their IP address and other identifying information, non-credible death threats are less likely to be pursued by authorities when they have more serious threats to address, simply because resources are better directed towards truly life-threatening cases. As long as Wu was taking proper steps to conceal the origin of the tweets, she would find herself at minimal risk of legal consequences. Key evidence emerged roughly a week later, even more clearly pointing to the D2B tweets as a pre-planned provocation. Wu tweeted a message containing an image supposedly about an operation to fake feminist attacks on her game for the betrayal of its female characters. One keen-eyed observer pointed to an archive of the image's EXIF data on 8chan, proving the image was created on October 8, before the death threats occurred, even before the oppressed GamerGater meme was created. Not only that, but the image itself makes direct reference to Twitter threats against her and her husband that were used to pin blame on 8chan, despite the image having been apparently created prior to the threats. When the image was posted on October 16, the OP of the thread was swiftly met, as usual, with condemnation and suspicion. Had Wu seen this thread, then she would know perfectly well that this operation was not being pursued by anyone, yet she announces it on Twitter as though it were a serious possibility. Something you may have picked up on is that Wu was not above outright lying about her opponents in an attempt to discredit them. Whether it was her blatant cherry-picking of the oppressed GamerGaters meme, ignoring that barely any images mentioned her with plenty referencing Bane from The Dark Knight Rises, or her generalizations of 8chan based on singular posts that are basically universally condemned by other members, she is not being honest. Another reason to believe this apparently pre-planned agitation was Wu's own work is because she's not even above impersonating a GamerGater to try and discredit them. Her actions with the Drake Harper or BroLols account tells you all you need to know about the woman. It is not that hard to fathom why Wu would take such extreme actions.
Brianna Wu went into hiding over the weekend. She felt she had to after receiving death threats. Let's bring in Brianna. Brianna Wu, who is a video game designer, an independent video game designer, who says she did receive death threats.
Well, Brianna Wu is a games developer who says she was forced to leave her home.
Brianna Wu, who received online death threats.
Joining us to share her story is game developer Brianna Wu.
First, I've been speaking to games designer Brianna Wu.
This was a powerful salvo of anti-GamerGate media attention at a time when we were seeing major revelations such as Game Journal Pros and the PR agency for Shadow of Mordor's publisher requiring YouTubers to provide positive coverage and other promotional support in order for them to get advanced copies with a little money to grease the wheels. It effectively poisoned the wells against GamerGate, albeit not resulting in the same explosion of hostility that would come later. Such attention showering on Wu right as she had released her first game was undoubtedly no small benefit for her personally either. For what it is worth, I did take a look at the trailer for her game, and even ignoring the blatant pandering about an all-girl team, it did not impress me in the slightest with its subpar voice acting and cliché story elements.
This mission, it will mean an all-out nuclear war. And until then, I'm ordering you to fight this!
I can't!
Where did you take them? They're up there. And we're down here. If you come at me, you better be ready to kill.
Your Honor, I object.
You would!
Overacting.
Perhaps little should be expected of a 4-person team making a 3-hour-long iOS game that sells for $3.99 on the App Store, and maybe I could purchase a copy to see if it meets, exceeds, or disappoints my very low expectations. Of course, I would neither know of her game nor consider forking money over for it, but for death to Brianna. And I am sure supportive voices mourning her unfortunate tale are going to have far fewer reservations about plopping down that paltry amount, even if the game is complete garbage. Well played, Mrs. Wu.
My friends are dying here. It would do a lot for my morale if I understood what they were dying for.